Alison says buying a unit in a metro area versus a house in a regional area, what should I consider? John, that looks like a question for you.
Yes, well, I presume Alison's talking about investment. So if she's not looking to live in it at all, let's clarify that for a start, because there's often hybrid versions, isn't there, where
there is.
We might buy something with the view of living in it longer term, or live in it now but then rent it out, etc. So let's go on the basis that Alison has no intention of living in this property at all, and it's just purely non-emotional investment.
I think even the thought that she's considering regional means that it's probably for investment.
Yeah, I know, but you're getting some hybrids where I'll just move anywhere. You just tell me, and I just want to live in it, take advantage of concessions and make as much money as I can, right? So, so I suppose the first part of this is price point. Where are we coming in at, and what can we buy in the metro area? Because, full disclosure, I think if we looked at metro versus regional, right, there's different points in time where regional will outperform metro and then vice versa. But over the journey, you would say a good asset in the metro would outperform regional, right?
Okay.
Now, when I say good asset, I'm talking about generally a niche asset, something that is in scarcity. So house with land, for example, right?
Okay.
So probably the reason why Alison's talking about this is okay, I can maybe buy a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom unit in a large complex in the metro area for, I don't know, $600,000. I can also go and buy a 3-bedroom house in a regional centre for $600,000, right? Apples for apples, is it? Well, no, because the performance of both those have varied over time, but also taking into account the yield, you're probably going to get a slightly better yield in a unit in the metro than you are regional home, right? However, you would argue that a lot of the growth performance will come from the regional home versus the unit, okay? We're in this situation, Rach, and we've probably been in it for the last maybe 3 to 4 years, probably post-COVID, where there's just no stock. So even 1-bedroom apartments are in demand because there's just lack of stock everywhere, wherever you look. So, and huge demand by people wanting to buy their own home, people wanting to invest, people want to downsize, upsize, side size, whatever it is, right? So it's not a false economy, but you just need to be wary that if we're buying today, we've got to think about what it could be like in 10 years' time, because Alison's probably wanting to hold this asset for the long term. So if she's wanting to get in and get out, yeah, the metro unit might be fine. But if we're looking 8 to 10 years, we've got to think, right, what's the supply demand likely to be in 8 to 10 years? No one knows. Traditionally, some of these unit sectors have had oversupply. So just got to be mindful of that. And things that we can look at to check is our vacancy rates over the past 20 years. You can look at things like stock on market or days on market, and you can look at sold prices, you can look at a whole heap of growth trends. So that's probably where I'd be starting. But then, looking at essentially your own strategy and saying price, cash flow or yield, type of property, and then indeed the location.
So for Alison, if she was considering two very similar price point, one's a unit, and let's say it is a good asset unit and regional, would looking at past performance be something that she would consider?
I think so. And past performance is not the last 5 minutes. Past performance to me is 10 years minimum.
Because we've been in a strange place since COVID. It hasn't been a normal cycle. So
right.
How far back would she look?
Yeah, I'd ideally want to go 20 years. You can't, it's very hard to find data longer than 20 years. Yeah. So, I'd love a 20-year average for Alison, but worst case, 10 years. Yeah, because you're right, COVID onwards, bit of a false economy. It's not maybe going to continue at that same rate in a lot of areas for a lot of assets.
Yeah, and we did do our predictions just a few weeks ago, and you did say units. That was your hot prediction for 26.
That was my buzz. Yeah, and I think I did preface that by saying niche, right?
Niche.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Alison, like understanding there is that difference between I'm buying in an apartment block of 150 and I'm buying a one bedroom that's 40 squares internally versus I'm buying a 2 bedroom, 2 bath, 1 car in a complex of 8.
Yeah. So I think people are getting to know that part with the units, and you've got to look at how many units are going to be like that in a similar area. What about with a regional area? What are some things that you'd consider regionally that you wouldn't need to consider if you were buying metro?
Yeah, so regional is a bit of a different beast because you've got to look at, like you look at regional, when you're coming from the city, you look at regional and say, oh, wow, there's all this land available. Like surely there's going to be oversupply. It's quite the opposite. Council drip feed developments are harder to generate out there, and farmers on the edge of town don't just all of a sudden say, well, I'm selling 1,000 acres to a developer and see you later. But it does happen in certain examples. But I think you've got to see population movement to an area. You almost want to identify the satellite towns or cities. So where is the government putting the emphasis on? New roads, new universities, better education, better healthcare, better everything, right? So whereas other regional centres, they might be cheap and affordable, but they're dwindling away in population. We probably want to take our eyes off those.
Yeah, well, they're the things to consider, Alison. We're answering your questions today. I am Rachelle Kroon. I'm joined by John Pidgeon, and this is Property.
Okay, so if you love property, as you probably do because you're listening to this, and you may be on Facebook, I get on there occasionally, Rach, I don't know about you, but we have a new Facebook page dedicated specifically for property called Australian Property Chat by This Is Property, don't we?
We do.
Yeah, so roll over there and follow and just, yeah, we're keen to obviously create that as a forum for our Q&As for the podcast, but generally try and add some value to everyone who's interested in buying property in all shapes and sizes.
Just want to chat property.
That's what we love doing, Rach. So Shannon says, how to use equity to buy a second investment without using equity from PPOR, principal place of residence, jointly owned, to purchase investment property. 2, to purchase separately using IP. 1, owned separately, if that made sense at all.
It does make sense. So from what I'm reading, Shannon is probably partnered.
Yes.
And her partner have their own home together.
Yes.
Shannon has gone and bought an investment property, maybe with her partner, maybe without, separately to their own home. Now, Shannon's wanting to buy an investment property, so a third property being investment property 2, but not wanting to involve her partner. Now, it may be a partner or it may be a friend or a sibling, but I think we're seeing this more and more where people are buying one property together and then they may be doing something separate. We'll call it a side quest. And how to actually structure that without involving the first person.
Going off on a tangent, do you think not a lot of it, but some of it is, okay, the divorce rates are high, I want to get my own assets and secure my own backyard first?
Yeah, and also I guess, some people have a different motivation to want to invest. So if you're not on that journey together financially, you can do things separately. And I think I'm seeing a lot more couples have separate finances because there's 2 careers, they're both working full time and they might have some different financial goals. They don't always have to be together. Everything together.
Yeah. Traditionalist says, well, everything needs to be together. But so in this situation, in Shannon's world, have come in with a separate asset already that's already in her name or his name.
Yes. So Shannon, if Shannon's wanting to buy an investment property just in her name and she has a mortgage and your own property with I'm going to call it your partner. It may not be. There's 2 things to consider. There's the serviceability question, which can you borrow without your partner? And there's also the equity question. So where do we get the equity to buy investment property 2, so property 3, without using the PPOR being their own home? So for that, let's look at equity first. So for you to buy investment property 2, you can use the equity in investment property 1 as long as there's sufficient equity. And we talk about usable equity. So if there's been a rise in value of investment property 1 and the valuation says that there's enough equity, you can get the deposit and costs for investment property 2 using just investment property 1. There's no need to involve your own home, which is why we talk about at the start, why we don't cross-collateralise at the start. Now, if Shannon and her partner crossed the securities when they bought investment property 1, that might be the case, but it sounds like they're already separate. So as long as those securities aren't crossed, you've got your own home here, you've got investment property 2, you can use the equity here using usable equity to create a split to then go and buy a property just in your name. So that's the equity piece.
Yeah.
The other piece which can get complicated, and there's actually been some changes recently to make this more simplistic, is the serviceability piece. So if you own a property with your partner and you're going to buy an investment property in your name only, traditionally, you need to be able to service the entire mortgage here as well as your investment property over here. But there's been some changes, and some banks have done this for a long time, but other banks are getting a little bit better at it as as people are investing with friends and siblings, and people are investing separately to their partner or their different hybrid versions.
Yeah.
The banks are catching up, and they're doing things like, the term that they use is common debt reducer.
Right.
So I have a common debt. Let's say you and I have a property together, and we bought this property together, and the mortgage is $500,000 on a $700,000 asset.
Yes.
And that property rents for $500 a week. I can go and buy a property over here, but instead of being responsible for this $500,000 debt, which traditionally they say, well, we don't know that John can pay his half, so we're going to assume that you have to pay the whole thing. I can sign a piece of paper to say, well, John's actually covering his half.
Yeah.
So I can just be covering half the mortgage here, getting half the rent, and then my servicing position's stronger to go and buy again.
Yeah. It's always interested me that, because there's no different to a husband and wife doing the same thing. They've never taken that into account. They've always said, right, 50% of the ownership, 50% of the debt. Now you're saying, because for a lot of investors doing it that way, as you mentioned, is saying, well, okay, Rachel has 100% of the debt, only 50% of the asset.
Yes.
So now you're saying, okay, with this stat deck that's now being signed, John signs off on the fact that I can handle 50% of the debt, or can I even say I'll handle 70% of the debt?
Well, that's an interesting one, because that's something that I have seen recently, which was a husband and wife, and the husband actually earned more than the wife. They had a joint mortgage, and then the wife wanted to buy an investment property separately.
On her own.
And did not want to, but she did not cover 50% of the mortgage. She only covered 25%.
Right.
So in that case, the stat deck did say, I am the husband of this person and I pay 75%. She says she pays 25%, and then she can use her income to go and support her next investment property.
Yeah, gotcha. Interesting. Okay.
So it doesn't have to be 50% in all cases.
Yeah, no, which is awesome news for anyone out there doing a JV or has a property with someone else. Like there's some really good things happening there. So is that I imagine limited to certain lenders?
It is limited to certain lenders, and some lenders do it better than others. Now, the common debt reducer, I remember if I go back 10 years ago and think about the things I was saying when siblings were even buying together, I would always say be really careful, because when you do become partnered and want to buy your family home, this investment might stop you doing that, because you've got to cover that whole debt and can only use half the rent, because most banks would look at a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
But Shannon, I think you'll find now that and your bank may not do it, but there are banks that do what's called common debt reducer. So it's just about finding a strategy that's going to work for you so you can continuing to buy in your own name. But the two things that you need to consider: how much equity do I have?
Yes.
That I can use, and do I have the income to service that new loan on its own?
Because in this example, like Shannon's got the PPOR with another person, the partner. Yeah. Right. But they've also got their IP number 1 that they own outright, 100%.
Yes.
Like they're the sole owner along with the bank. So Shannon's wanting to take the equity from that property to go and buy IP number 2, again, without partner. So she'll, or he, I don't know if it's male or female, but in any case, they will end up with 2 investment properties And the partner will still just have ownership, 50% ownership over the principal place of residence in this example.
That's right.
Right. So let's just say, right, IP number one that Shannon owns on their own is a 600K value, 400K debt. The bank says, right, you can lend up to maybe 80% of that. That's 480. So the difference between 480 and 400 is 80K when I went to school. So now that means Shannon can take 80K for the costs and deposit for IP number two.
That's right. So just like you would put a split against your PPOR to buy investment one, you can put a split against investment one to buy investment two.
Yeah.
So it's important to note that from an accountant's perspective, what's tax deductible against that property is what its purpose is, not what it's secured against. So it's really the same, we the most basic thing of, you've got your equity in your PPOR and you take a split and buy an investment property. It's no different when you're doing it for investment property one to investment property two.
Yeah, that's
just rinse and repeat.
Yeah, but the important part you raised there was Shannon needs to have the servicing on their own because partner's not in the picture at all. If they're on 100 grand, great. If they're on 30 grand, probably not going to happen. So
Shannon's income will need to be enough to cover her share of the own home, her investment property. So even if that investment property is covering itself, so cost to hold might be covering itself, in the bank's calculator, there's still a portion of Shannon's income that's going to be attributed to that because there's the stress test of the banks, and you may be paying interest only, but the banks will look at principal and interest at a 3% higher rate. So even if that's a neutrally geared property, let's say it might be 10,000 of your income's allocated here, but then you've got to have enough spare to have the shortfall of investment property too. So servicing's one thing, equity's another. Can you do it? Absolutely, as long as you can tick those boxes. So Shannon's partner may need to go and get a stat debt for the principal place of residence. Yeah, look, if it's some banks you don't, but especially if he was covering more than 50%, you would definitely need a stat debt. And when we're talking about, we're talking about those structures, we were talking before we jumped on today about something that we're seeing a bit of a trend of when we're talking about cost to hold. Because what were you saying? So a lot of people come through our life and talk about different things, whether it be clarity calls or 15-minute free chats or just in our buyer's agent service and also our coaching. But I'm seeing a lot more, and you agreed, you're seeing as many, people that are coming to us with a portfolio that's already established, and it may be, let's say, for example, principal place of residence and 2 investment properties. Yeah, right. That's really common at the moment. Yeah, it is common. So they've obviously done well in the sense that they've saved well, they've bought well, they've got some equity, continue to go and rinse and repeat. But we're seeing principal and interest being paid on all 3 assets. Yeah. Okay. Now, if I go back to the start of time, I've always been told principal and interest for my principal place of residence, interest only for my investments. So that allows me to take that excess cash, improve my buffers, have cash for liquidity and sleep at night, and or pay down my principal place of residence, which is commonly bad debt, sooner, and let my investments do their thing and run really lean on the outlay of costs there for that. So it's an interesting conversation, Rach, because there's no right or wrong answer to this. Paying down loans on all properties is definitely a good thing. We've got to look at what our reason for doing that is. Are we comfortable that it's going to take our principal place of residence longer to pay off the debt? Do we want to continue to pay down debts on all properties so that we can increase equity? Because that's a lot of people's thought. Or is it just I come from the angle of mum and dad just said pay down all debts when they arrive. Like that, I don't think that cuts it anymore. We've got to look financially and logically at why we're actually doing that. Yeah, and I've talked to 2 people this week that have been paying principal and interest on investments, and one was looking at selling an asset because of the cost to hold. because it's getting rate. They've had a rate increase, and they're thinking, well, should I sell one investment? And when you actually look at their lending setup, you think if you rolled this back to interest only, everything becomes a whole lot more affordable. So I think people need to think about cost to hold, and you've done so well on these properties. Let's make them easier to hold, because it's the name of the game is holding the properties, isn't it?
Yeah, in a lot of cases it is, and sometimes people want more and more properties and just build a portfolio, and there will be times where they have to sell down on certain assets and times in markets and things like that, upgrade their family home or whatever that might look like. But yeah, I think I suppose our thought is, just don't have your head in the sand saying I need to pay P&I on all of my properties just because I've always done that. I think we just need to pivot, and talking to your mortgage broker and looking at your structures and looking at your scenarios might allow you to get that third property if we can restructure to say interest only on one or two of them.
For sure. So cost to hold, I think, should be the name of the game, rather than just, are we paying everything down?
Yeah, like I look at a $600,000 or $700,000 mortgage, and you're probably up for about $7,000 or $8,000 in principal. So you times that by 3, there's an extra 20 or 30 grand going out each year, which some of that may be able to strip back and apply to your future purchases.
Yeah, but looking at another property, maybe just have your broker do the figures, both principal and interest only, before you choose your next asset.
Yeah, certainly.
This is Property is brought to you by Sphere Home Loans. Sphere Home Loans is a mortgage broker that helps our listeners all around Australia. So, if you want to get into your first home sooner, looking at upgrading, an additional property, or want your current mortgage reviewed, just search Sphere Home Loans or click the link in the show notes, and their dedicated brokers will be able to help you wherever you are. If you are, however, after personal financial advice, don't get it from a podcast. If you would like help based on your own personal situation, head over to moneypodcast.com.au, click Get Help, and we'd be happy to introduce you to one of our trusted professionals. That's moneypodcast.com.au and click Get Help.
Nick asks, Equity 101, how often can you access? Is it feasible or worthwhile to tap into a small amount of equity to fund renos, to increase value to further access equity for investment property, or disregard renos and look at investment property first? Serviceability with investment property is much different to PPOR, etc. Is this much more different?
Yeah.
So that's a lot, Nick. But 101, let's break it down into basics. How often can we access equity?
Yeah, well, don't want to bore people with the history, but when I first started my portfolio, my goal was to get my deposit back out within 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Now, today's investors expect it in 5 minutes,
They
right?
do, and they're getting it in some cases.
And they're getting it in 5 minutes. But let me strip that back. We say, right, we buy for 500, we put in 50K, that's 10% deposit for investment. I want that 50 back out in 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, yeah. And I think that's realistic, which is unbelievable if we can go and get it and then go and get it again. So our property value goes to 550 in that example, we get our equity out, and then the property goes up to 600 or 650 and we get our equity out a second time, right? Unfortunately for Nick and everyone else here listening, is there is an endpoint where the bank says, hang on a minute, cool your jets, we've got a whole heap of debt going on here. What's our cash flow look like? More importantly, what's our income look like? It's a real navigation game, isn't it, to make sure that we know what the next step's going to be.
Yeah, and I don't... when it says how often can you access, there's no rules.
No.
Nick, you can access your equity whenever you want, as long as you've got sufficient equity and sufficient income to take it out.
Servicing,
and I do see people buy properties and act very quickly on that. Now, I had a client buy in a beach suburb last month.
Yes.
And they've already got their deposit out.
Already.
So they bought really well. And this is a trick. So the valuation was with one bank, and you can't get another val in 5 minutes with one bank, but they actually bought that property with this bank. They've refinanced 3 weeks later because they've got a higher val already because they bought so well and they've got their deposit out. So that's an extreme case. However, it answers the question, how often can you access it? Whenever you want. There's no rules. There's no limit to say it can only be at 6 months or 12 months or every 5 years.
Yeah. And I think the common, I suppose, transcript was once you buy it, wait 6 months because the value will just come back in and value it at the same price as you purchased it at. But you're saying in that example, that wasn't the case.
It wasn't the case.
But was that a full val where they went out and inspected, or was it a desktop?
That was a full val because there had been other comparable sales, and it was just they bought really well.
That's great.
And although they couldn't have gotten that equity out with their bank one, they could with bank two.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an extreme case, but where Nick's asking, is it worthwhile to tap in to do some renos and then get further equity out? I think the risk with that is it going to add the value? Like, what are you renovating? If you're going to actually get cash out strategically to add value to your property, to be able to buy an investment property, do you believe that it's going to add that much value? If I'm getting $30,000 out, am I adding $50,000 in value? Will a valuer say it's going to sell for $50,000 more?
Yeah, it could be a slippery slope, that one, couldn't it? Because you go and chunk 50K into the reno, you add some nice improvements in your eyes, and then the valuer comes back out and says, well, it's improved the value by 30 grand. You've actually gone backwards in the bank's eyes right now. Ultimately, for the long term, might be great, but doesn't solve the problem for Nick in this example right away.
It doesn't. And I think for Nick, maybe look at your strategy. What's the most important thing? Is it that you want to have renovations on your home? If that's what you want to do, great. But if your primary goal is to buy an investment property and you have the equity now to do it, I wouldn't muck around.
No, one thing you could do, Nick, is look at comparables in the street or the suburb to say, well, a fully renovated or a partially renovated house is sold for X, and then you can get some sort of ease there. But I don't know about you, Rach, but personally, when I've gone in, we've always wanted to buy something that you could add value to in some way, shape or form, whether that be development or granny flat or a cosmetic or structural improvements. I don't rush in to do them straight away. You let the growth of the markets do a lot of the heavy lifting, and then you might do the improvements later on when you've already built a portfolio up and it's just cream on the top sort of thing. So, yeah, I'd be reluctant to put 50K in when 50 can actually form the next deposit, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, that's right, because you might go and spend that 50 and it just add 50, but that actually doesn't increase your equity position at all.
It really needs to be improved by 100, doesn't it? If you
it has to be more, because your usable equity is still at that 80%. Correct. It's not 100%.
Yeah.
Now, Nick also asks, serviceability with investment property, is this much different to a PPOR? And the answer is, it is.
Yeah.
So it is different. Once you hold an investment property, even if that investment property, we say, washes its own face, even if it covers its own face, there's still a portion of your income that's being attributed to holding that property. So is it going to impact your ability to borrow for your own home when you hold an investment property? Absolutely it is.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody the other day that held a property and they wanted to upsize their own home, but they also wanted to buy a second investment property. Again, if your goal is to upsize your own home, I probably would do that first.
Yeah.
Because it can impact your serviceability and sort of muck with your strategy when you do hold multiple investment properties.
Yeah, so it's sacrifices, isn't it? And just seeing which is the highest order of merit. But when he's asking if I was going to buy an investment property versus I was going to buy a principal place, the borrowing capacity for both is different, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And generally, like, are we seeing an increase borrowing for investment, or are we seeing being able to borrow more for principal place? Because I feel that changes over the time and changes with different lenders.
It changes with lenders because you have some banks will use more percentage of rent than others, and some will want a certain amount of, some, even if you're renting for a particular amount, some will shade it.
Yeah.
So you've really got to, if you were looking at your options, Nick, I would look at multiple banks to look at what your serviceability look like across, because it will change between the banks that want owner-occupied business and the banks that want investment business.
What their focus
what their
is
levers are that they will pull to attract the business they want. So it's definitely not a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, so on the back of this, Larissa said debt recycling, wants us to discuss that, right? Don't know about the words debt recycling. It's so common out there, but I don't know, it just doesn't sit with me, Larissa. So I'm going to change it. It's now capital reallocation strategy. Or you can call it
reallocate CRS.
CRS. You can call it CRS. So basically what we're doing is, because we've paid down our principal place of residence, or there's been growth in that asset, we're taking the equity from that and we're going to buy an investment property over here.
So debt recycling is a fancy way of saying I'm using my equity for investment purposes.
Correct.
Yeah.
End of story.
It doesn't need a fancy word.
No, it doesn't need a fancy word, but it has one. and
now it's got a new one.
But I think it's a good way to grow your wealth.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to get diversification, and it's a good way to start getting some tax benefits, because all that the equity that we take from our principal place now becomes tax deductible if we're using it for something that's income producing. So that's a good thing. We just need to know that in our own mind, we're ready to go. We want to buy an investment property. We want to take that leap of faith. And of course, the banks need to be able to lend us some money to not only pull the equity out, but to lend us the remainder on the purchase.
So, Larissa, debt recycling is a fancy way of saying I'm using the equity in my property for investment purposes.
Yeah, and we can expand on that forever and a day, but we will continue to. But that's the bare basics of what debt recycling means. So Kate says, using equity for major reno or PPOR, principal place of residence, or smaller reno to make it comfortable to buy an IP, investment property. Talk the pros and cons, Rachel.
This is such a common question at the moment.
Yes.
Am I doing a major renovation of my own home? I want lifestyle. My kids would like a pool.
Yes.
I want some nice things. Or do I sacrifice that, maybe do a smaller renovation, some minor cosmetics, and that way we can afford an investment property and we may be able to improve our position longer term?
Yeah. I feel renovations on our own home, do they add value to our overall wealth? Yes. Do we see it in our bank statement? No. Does it improve our lifestyle? Yes. We get to enjoy the new kitchen or enjoy the new pool or a new garage or whatever it might be. However, we're paying for that.
We are.
And no one else is responsible to pay for that other than ourselves. Whereas going and buying investment property, our tenants are essentially paying for, let's call it 80% of the running costs, 70% even. Tax person gets a refund. There's probably another 10% there. We might be up for 10% of the running costs of that investment property. So, Kate, it comes down to priorities. Which one do you want? Do you want to build wealth creation through investment and outlay some money, but majority of it is paid for by someone else? Or do you want to improve your own home to increase your lifestyle, but also increase your outgoings because your loan's going to be higher?
And I think it's such a personal choice.
Absolutely.
So that's not something that somebody can give you advice on. Somebody can give you the scenarios both ways. And that's something you and I do a lot of, which is, hey, if you did a major renovation, you spent $200,000 on your own home, here's what your repayments would be. This would be your mortgage. If you went and bought this asset here and rented for this, this is what the repayments would be, your cost to hold. But when those numbers are in front of you, Kate, you're going to decide based on your goals, your family's goals, what's important to you. And that changes for everybody.
It does indeed. And this is a really common one for me when I'm doing clarity calls with people. But Kate, one thing I would ask is, what do you want in the next 3 to 5 years, plus even 10 years? And say, well, right, is this renovation on our own home urgent right now? How old, if we've got kids, how old are they? We want to enjoy these times with them at home. There's, as you said, there's no right or wrong, but I would map out the next 10 years and say, hypothetically, what do things look like in our life? In 10 years' time, how old will I be? How old will my kids be if I've got them? What do we want to be doing with our life? How close we are to retirement? Do I enjoy my work? How much wealth do I want to build inside super, outside super? All these questions that are not common barbecue questions, right? They're just really sit down and have a chat about it with those closest to us to understand, well, okay, if we do this now, what's the flow-on effect of that? Because if we do a renovation on our principal place of residence, which is extremely common,
and stressful when you're living in a home being renovated.
Yes.
Let's not discount how stressful that can be.
Well, yeah, depending on the size of it. But generally, we're increasing the value of it. So we're not going backwards in the value of the property, but the extra repayments are there. Or we might be using our cash, which then was already offsetting the debt. Now it will not offset the debt because we're using it for the renos. Versus upgrading. That's the other part of it too. Maybe a story for another day. But yeah, so think long term is probably where I would go first.
And Kate, I would probably get the scenarios done both ways. Go to your broker and say, if I did this renovation, and just have some rough ideas about what it would cost, what would my mortgage repayments look like? Would I still be able to invest if I did this? And then get the figures on the investment property. And then when you're sitting down as a family and making decisions about what's important to you, you've got the numbers in front of you.
Yeah.
Now, I was speaking to a client earlier in the week that came to me maybe 7 years ago, and they were doing a knockdown rebuild on the east side of Batto Bay on the Central Coast.
Yes.
And I did the numbers for them 7 years ago, and they did not make sense.
Right.
It did not make sense for them to knock down this house and rebuild it. It would have been better for them financially to sell and buy, because just when the numbers went, but they didn't do that. They did what they wanted to do. They had great neighbours, and 7 years later, they have zero regrets because their house went up so much in value. They got to stay where they really wanted to live.
Yes.
So the numbers didn't say this is what you should do, but they made their decision knowing the numbers.
Yeah, location versus asset as well, isn't it? But really important one, know your numbers.
Know your numbers. At the end of the day, Kate, make the decision that's right for you.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think that's a wrap, Rach. Some great questions there. I appreciate you all sending them in.
We are in the, if you're watching on YouTube, we're in the new studio, so you'll notice that my skin is not green.
Was it ever green?
It was green. Those lights, they were very bright green.
Is that right?
They are.
There you go.
This is a very fresh, it's like a house studio.
It is. Smell a new carpet and everything. And if you are on Apple or Spotify, one of those two forums, give us a nice 5-star if you think we're worthy of that. If you don't, then don't. But thanks for tuning in once again, and we'll see you next time.
We will.
Any information given in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and you should seek your own property advice before acting on anything you may hear in this podcast. If you want to start or advance your property education journey, John Pidgeon's book, Sort Your Property Out and Build Your Future, is available where all good books are sold, or via the link in the podcast show notes. Opinions or comments from any guests on the podcast are theirs and not those of the hosts, the publisher, or their respective license holders.